Kinsey Schofield here, and I am sitting down with royal author Hugo Vickers. You wrote this gorgeous book, Alice. This is about Prince Philip's mom, and it's like more popular than ever. Do you mind if I flatter you with a nice little intro that I wrote? Do you mind? Is that awkward? Hugo explores the remarkable life of Princess Alice, tracing her extraordinary recovery from mental illness, her experience in Greece during World War II, and how she turned personal hardship into a lifelong mission of service to others. This was originally published in 2000, and it's been re-released 25 years later, finding renewed relevance. It stands as a testament to Prince Philip's mother and the enduring power of her legacy. A gorgeous book. Does it surprise you at all that it's blown up on Amazon again?
Well, it makes me very happy.
Of course.
Because it's such an interesting story. It's a story of a woman who dedicated her whole life to service at great cost to herself. And not many people are doing that in 2025.
Well, we won't name names, but that was really my first question. Why Princess Alice? Why were you so enchanted by this member of the British royal family when there are others out there that are loud and wild? This is so interesting that you saw the value in her.
Well, what actually happened was I got a call once from Buckingham Palace, from Prince Philip's former private secretary, Sir Brian McGrath, and he said they were looking for somebody to write about Prince Philip's mother. My first thought was, well, who's going to read that? My second thought was, don't be ridiculous, this is what you've wanted to do all your life. I knew quite a lot about her already, and it came about because Prince Philip's sister, Princess George of Hanover, and the Queen got their heads together and thought, they had to slightly persuade Prince Philip that it was a good idea, but thought it was a good idea to do a book while they were around to guide it, help me. Possibly, they didn't hinder, but possibly hinder a little bit, you know.
Prince Philip, specifically?
Well, possibly, but that didn't happen. But, you know, so there weren't very many people who knew her, but obviously Prince Philip did and his sister, and it was great to have their help and cooperation, and particularly given access, because Sir Brian said, you know, your job is to get a publisher and write the book. My job is to open doors for you. And he not only did that, he planted me at lunch tables. He just sent me all over the place and gave me access to the most amazing archives, which is where, of course, the story could be found.
It is so exciting because you've told me a little bit about this process. What do you think is most understood about this woman? We have the crown, which typically comes off as very, what is the word I'm looking for, other than incorrect? We have the crown. Is she remembered at all in any other pop culture spaces? And if so, do you feel like they find the true Alice?
Well, the crown, of course, is sort of what brought her to people's attention again. And in fact, my book was still in print in America, or print on demand, and suddenly thousands of copies were being sold, which is amazing, because it showed that people, even if they were watching a ridiculous portrayal of her, as it was in The Crown, in which she's giving interviews, she would things she would never have done, and locked up in a room rather like the first Mrs. Rochester in Jane Eyre, whereas in fact she was housed in a beautiful room which I've been in the front of Buckingham Palace overlooking the forecourt.
Wow. All
that sort of thing. But people were interested, and that's one good thing that comes out of this series, is that people thought, well, she looks like an interesting character, we'd like to know more about her. And luckily, my book was there to do that, and hence I said to the publisher over here, why didn't you bring it out again? And rather to their surprise, you know, it's sort of rather taken off.
It has. Yeah. I know. Congratulations. Do you think the mental health part of her story would be told or would be perceived differently today? Because back then, wasn't it hush-hush? Wouldn't you want to keep something like that a secret?
Very much so. I mean, she had what I call a serious religious crisis nervous breakdown, which is so understandable because, first of all, they were in exile in Paris, relying on the generosity of rich relations, which they didn't like.
Right.
They had to do that. Secondly, her favourite aunt, Ella, had been thrown down a mine shaft in Russia, the Grand Duchess Elizabeth, where she was singing psalms for 24 hours before she died. Oh. Her other aunt, Alex, who was married to the Tsar, the whole family assassinated in 1918.
That's right.
Same year. And then, of course, all the houses where she'd gone to, all the castles where sort of, you know, all the people, the Kaiser was overthrown, Grand Duke of Hesse, her uncle, overthrown. everything had been turned upside down. And so there were a lot of people who were exploiting people like her in those days and sort of Ouija boards and crossing people over the divide. And it got very bad. And to answer your point is basically when she started to behave rather strangely, they did not want her doing that in the drawing room at home. So off she went to a clinic. Oh. And that's what people did in those days. And actually, when she was in the clinic, she had a long correspondence with her doctor, Dr. Binswanger, which I was given access to, which is highly intelligent about what was going on in her head and things. And eventually she discovered that it was her mother who had put her there. She was absolutely furious. Mm-hmm. And she was allowed out. And the great thing is that having come out, she never had to go back in again. Oh, they always thought she might. They got worried. They were always worried, never took her seriously. But she was perfectly all right after that.
I mean, truly my favorite story is the story of her hiding this beautiful Jewish family.
Well, yes.
Yeah. During the Nazi occupation. How did she manage to do that, and what risks? I mean, she was facing, I can't imagine what would have happened to her. I get goosebumps thinking about what would have happened to her had someone knocked on the door and discovered what was truly going on inside.
Well, they did knock on the door. I mean, the Cohen family, and I met the two brothers in Paris in the late 1990s. They were still living at that point. They had been friends of the Greek royal family, and through an intermediary, it was discovered that they were in great danger. And so she took them in, and she hid them in her house, which was absolutely opposite Archbishop Damaskinos, who was, the regent at the time, where there were lots of Nazi guards. But of course, as you probably know, Princess Alice was profoundly deaf. And so if any soldier came to the house, she just didn't happen to hear. Exactly.
What? Excuse me?
They just thought she was a silly old woman and sort of left her be. She would have been in very, very serious trouble. She never spoke about it afterwards. And she just would have thought, as Prince Philip said when she was given the Yad Vashem Award, which is what is given to non-Jewish people for huge service to a Jewish family or to the Jewish people. He said, well, she would have just thought it was part of her duty. She didn't think it was worth mentioning, which is, again, says a lot about her.
Yeah, it makes my heart swell to hear you say that. And what led her to become a nun? I mean, this is not the most... That's not the most glamorous gig, and she could have been glamorous. You've shown me picture after picture of her in tiaras and jewelry. This was... it just tells us so much about her heart, doesn't it?
Yes, well, it all goes really back to the Prince Consort, who turned the British royal family into a charitable royal family, that they were doing charitable works. And in particular, Florence Nightingale, instrumental in the Alice nurses, which her grandmother, Alice of Hesse, set up. And then her aunt Ella, that I mentioned, in Moscow, had a convent. I've been to the convent. Prince Philip also went to the convent on one occasion. Had nursing sisters who went out into the community. The great thing was we must be practical. Mm-hmm. So first of all, what Princess Alice did was to get these girls and train them as nurses. But I hate to tell you that to a Greek man, a nurse is equivalent of can be treated like a prostitute.
Oh, great.
So she put them in habits, and she put herself into a habit as well. She wasn't a real nun. Yeah. But of course, this way it was very convenient for raising money for charity, and it meant to say that they were identifiable, as people doing service to the community and so forth.
Respect them and behave.
Exactly, absolutely. Oh. But I mean, her mother was very funny about Princess Alice and said, what can you say about a nun who smokes and plays canasta?
Oh, that is hilarious. I love that. So was there any royal reaction to the book? Did they like the book? Because you were approached by people within the circle. So what was the outcome?
Well, when I finished it, I had a typescript like this, and I brought it to Sir Brian's office. And actually, Prince Philip happened to wander into the office, and he looked at it as if it was an unexploded bomb. And he said he would read it at Craiggown, where he was going just before Christmas. And indeed he did. And then it came back, and Sir Brian said, well, I must tell you, Prince Philip expresses himself in a robust way. I knew, because I'd seen what he'd done to other people's manuscripts in the past. Rot, rubbish, nonsense, he writes in the margin. Doesn't mean it's that. It means he thinks it is, but you can fight your corner. And you could say, would he like to see 22 pages of Foreign Office paper?
You have proof.
Yeah, you win that one on to the next.
Yeah. But what about, I love when he would write on your papers, is this really necessary?
Is this necessary? Well, that, of course, was interesting because it meant to say that he accepted it was true, but it was slightly uncomfortable ground. Mm-hmm. And the answer was sometimes, look, let's just lose that. Doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to the main thrust of the story. At other times, particularly in the way that I handled the illness and the time she was in the clinic, I thought it was necessary because I didn't want to be accused of covering things up. I didn't want another author to come along and say, well, actually, there's more to be said.
Clever.
So basically, what I wanted to explain was what was happening to her, how she was handling it. Not every, let's supposing she'd thrown something at somebody. You didn't necessarily put that in. Just sort of the manifestations of irritation or something. Not saying she did, but supposing you found something like that you could leave out. But I did want to sort of cover the main point. And he accepted that.
Is it true that he would never tell you this himself, but he learned, he told other people he learned more about his mother than he'd ever thought he could know thanks to your book?
Well, that was what was so nice was I kept hearing, he sort of said well-researched and well-received, or indeed that very point that he'd learnt more about his mother from my book than he knew in life. And I can well understand why he couldn't say that to me direct, because he had never had parents bringing him up. He was left on his own. So he couldn't really say thank you and he couldn't really say sorry. But he never ever mentioned the book to me. I probably saw him 2 or 3 times a year, every year after that book came out till quite near the end. And I was equally determined never to say it to him. But of course, nice things happened. Like when his sister died, they took me with them on the plane to Germany, on the 146, and with the royal family and King Constantine and things. That wouldn't have happened if he didn't like the book. So I feel confident.
Right. I'm pretty confident too. He does strike me as somebody that would compliment you behind your back. Compliment you behind your back.
Yes.
What about Queen Elizabeth? Was she curious at all about Princess Alice?
Yes, well, that was rather interesting because it just happened that I was invited to dinner by the Lord Carnarvon, and there were 7 people there, and I was put next to the Queen at dinner. And so obviously the story came up. And in particular, what was interesting was that it was about her sister Louise, who married the King of Sweden. And I found myself explaining to the Queen that, she had had this boyfriend in the First World War who was an artist and who turned out to be homosexual, so or not a decent man, as they put it at the time. And that was quite interesting. And then we talked about Princess Alice, and she was very good to her mother-in-law, who she took her in from 1967 to 69, lived at Buckingham Palace, and would often go and have dinner with her if she was on her own. Aww. And so it was very interesting to hear her take on it. As she said, that's really when they got to know her. They didn't really know her so well before then.
And you posted a picture of Prince William visiting Princess Alice's grave on Instagram, and it really blew up. It seems he really appreciates how special his great-grandmother was. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, well, it's always been difficult, her being buried in Jerusalem. That's because her Aunt Ella is buried in this convent as well, and she's in a little crypt underneath. And Prince Charles wasn't able to get there for ages. When he went to one of the funerals of one of the American, Israeli presidents, I think, or prime ministers, then he was able to go. Prince Philip went in when he picked up the Yad Vashem Award, and Prince William was also over there. So I think that's when he really discovered his great-grandmother and got interested in her. And indeed, he sort of cited her as an example at the Holocaust Memorial event this January. And he read out a passage, about her life to show really what can be done when he's relating with the Jewish people. So I think he's rather adopted her, as well he should, as well he might, as an icon, as the sort of person whose exemplary example of service can be followed.
Can you give me a little insight onto Prince Philip based on this book? What do you learn about him?
Well, I think that was the whole thing, that a lot of the Queen's ladies in waiting said to me, sort of really explain Prince Philip, because Prince Philip himself said to me when I had my main interview with him, my father was away, my mother was ill, I had to get on with it. And that was his philosophy of life, that he just had to make his own way. But you saw that he really, from the age of about 8, he didn't get a birthday card from his mother for 7 years. And then, of course, when her daughter was killed in the plane crash, when the plane hit the chimney in Ostend, which is a scene they go on about in The Crown, and they get it all muddled up and blame him for that, which
Ridiculous.
is disgraceful.
Yeah.
But after that, she felt that she needed to come back and be a mother. Now, that must have also been quite difficult for him. So you said about her going back to Greece. I think the reason she went back to Greece and had him out there with her, was that for a time he was pretty much heir to the Greek throne, because until Frederica gave birth to the man who became King Constantine, he would have, if everybody had lived the same thing, he would have wound up as King of Greece in 1964, in which case he would not have been able to marry the Queen. But luckily, they got him out of Greece, and the King George VI and George II of Greece said, no, into the British Navy.
Right.
And the rest you know.
The rest is history. All right, I hope that was enough of a tease for you to get on Amazon right now or wherever you buy your books and buy Hugo Vickers' Alice. It is a beautiful portrait of a selfless woman, and learn more about the royal family, its rich history, and what makes Prince Philip the man that he was, that we all know and love. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Kinsey Schofield.